We are talking again about liabilities, right? Your house probably is your biggest one. And guess what? If you owned a house before the pandemic, you got a lot of money in equity because your housing price has gone up 17%. That's across the board. All American homes are now worth on average $50,000 more than they were last year.
That sounds like a great thing, Natalie.
If you actually owned your house and stayed there. It's not a great thing if you are looking for a house. It's not a great thing if you're a buyer, right? And it seems like it's fine for a seller, but the seller is going to go buy another house that's $50,000 more expensive as well. This is absolutely what you call a bubble when prices continue to rise and incomes do not rise in a commensurate way. Commensurate is the word, commensurate way. The same thing happened with average rent throughout the United States. Rents are up 18%. Do you think renters have 18% income increase? No. And also you have to take into account that inflation is over 7%. So your income to keep up with all of this would have had to have gone up 18% for rent plus another 7% for goods and services. I don't think that happened to the average person. Although interestingly enough, we have in the news by the numbers section in the newsletter that some Wharton Business School students were surveyed to say, what do you think the average American salary is? And these fools answered all 6 digits, right? They think that the average American makes 6 figures.
No, it was 800,000.
That was one response. One person said he thinks I don't know if it was a he or she. I'm going to assume it's a he. Sorry. What woman would say that? I don't know. Okay, but I know.
Right.
I take that back.
So when I make fun of women drivers, you give me the stink eye.
Okay, this person said that they thought the average income was $800,000. It is not. It's actually closer to about between 30 and 50, depending who you ask. So
yeah, $40,000. We just did this. We did the story earlier in the week about the average income in the United States.
Yes,
71% of Americans have an average income of about $40,000. So the Wharton School of Business down there in Philadelphia,
they're
my
really
home city,
training good businessmen and women.
The average, they think that it's 800,000. Again, so home
maybe
prices.
They're only talking about Wall Street.
Maybe.
Perhaps. Even lobbyists don't make that, at least in their first year.
Even Wall Street, even the first year bankers, second year bankers in Wall Street don't make anywhere nearly that kind of money. And you're living in Manhattan making $125,000 a year, and they're having to sleep on a floor because they can't afford stuff. Anyway, home prices, 16.9%. It's the highest on record and continuing to climb. And look, millennials cannot find a home, so millennials are out. Boomers are actually able to afford getting their homes. And the reason is they've been able to establish credit.
Yeah.
So at least they have some credit they've been able to establish. And the millennials don't have that history of credit, and they don't have as much of a down payment. So they're getting screwed, and they're forced to rent, of course. So they're being pushed into the rental market, and rents are skyrocketing on top of that.
So, there are people who would have benefited from this. Anybody who was able to get a loan on this increased equity and did not move, sure, did great, right? Anybody who was able to actually use the equity that was created, but not go buy a more expensive thing, sure. But everyone else, no one's actually cashing in on that equity if they're going to buy and sell or sell and buy.
Look at the EU. Look at house prices. It's all across. It's everywhere.
Yes.
So, and you talk about a bubble right now. House prices in the EU, and look at rents just continuing to climb, but housing prices skyrocketing.
So
do you have a chart? Sorry, do you have a chart to compare this to 2008 to see the parallels?
I don't have a chart handy.
But do you know how similar it was? Was it the very exact same thing? Are we seeing
I happen to know because I used to be a licensed, I used to have a real estate license in New Jersey, that in some places in New Jersey during the right before the bubble burst, prices were going up something like 50% a year. In some places. Now, New Jersey is an outlier because it is the most dense state in the country. But
let's talk about the differences here. Let's talk. This is an important distinction that David raises here about 2007, 2008. Then anyone could get a mortgage. If you
Had a pulse.
If you had a pulse, and in some cases, if you didn't have a pulse,
Yeah.
you could get a mortgage. I mean, they had Ninja loans, right? Ninja stood for no income, no job. You could get a loan. No income, no job, you could get a loan. You had people coming from Honduras to do just day labor jobs. And while they were here, they're like, instead of renting, I'm just going to get a mortgage and buy a house. And they would. They didn't even have citizenship. They didn't even have a job that could prove that they were here long term. They didn't have like 5 years of a job experience. The banks didn't care. Right. And by the way, no one went to jail in the United States. None of the big banks went to jail for this mess that they got us into. Nevertheless, people could get a house, ridiculous amounts. Prices were going up. They could sell it a week later and make $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 in profit a week later. That's different than 2022. It's very difficult to get a mortgage in 2022. Mm-hmm. You have to show history of income. The banks are not just willing to give out loans to people unless you have a job, unless you have a history of salary. You have a good credit score. You don't have a history of default. You don't have a bankruptcy. There's a lot of stuff. It makes it very, very difficult to get a mortgage in 2022. So we are in a totally different bubble right now as it relates to this economy.
Well, right. And the head of the National Association of Realtors says this is not the same because it's a supply issue, because it's just simply that there are not enough houses for people who want them. It's not due to inflated values and shoddy lending. It's just simply like too many people want this house, so the price gets bid up, right? In fact, yesterday in the newsletter, there was a $2 million house in San Francisco that was completely dilapidated, should have been condemned, and it was bought for $2 million, although it did have a parking space.
Oh, good.
So that alone in San Francisco is...
But it really comes down to supply and demand. It's not like it was back in 2008 where, anyone with a mortgage, anyone with a pulse could get a mortgage. It really is about supply and demand this time. We don't have enough homes.
Do you think that that's why the BlackRock and stuff are buying it up to falsely make the market like more saturated? So they're like buying them so that they're not available so that the prices go up.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's not. They're in a business, right? And we heard from the BlackRock CEO on this particular issue. Michael, I forget his last name off the top of my head. He said this, and it was leaked audio, and he said this in front of shareholders, and he said specifically, we're sitting on billions of dollars, waiting for these foreclosures to happen. One of you wrote me just yesterday in our chat. Left a comment on one of our videos, and forgive me if I don't have that in front of me, and I don't remember your name. Might have been John, sending me a message on one of our videos. Just left a comment saying, "Yeah, there's foreclosures happening all around us in my neighborhood." And I said, "Can you tell me where?" And I've got to check back in on that message. But foreclosures up. BlackRock swooping in, buying up 1 out of every 7 homes right now, and these big hedge funds are going to be, turning this nation into a nation of renters, and they're going to make money off of it.
Yes.
And it's not illegal.
They're not turning around and just holding them just to falsely inflate the market.
No. They want them to either renovate them, place tenants in them as part of their portfolio. I mean, this is what they're doing. 1 out of every 7 homes sold in the last year went to these hedge funds.
And you think about that, what that does to your balance sheet, right? You buy something that's worth a whole lot more. Your balance sheet swells, as does your ability to then buy more things when you actually have paid a discount price considerably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the same old story. It's all right for some. It's interesting, the cities that saw the fastest rent increase were New York City. Obviously, rents always are high in New York, but it was interesting because during the pandemic, people were moving out like crazy and rents went down. So it's good for you if you secured a cheap apartment during those times. But those deals are available no more. Tampa, also interesting. Why?
The what?
Is one of the highest rents in the country is in Tampa, Florida. Why so many renters in Tampa?
That's interesting.
And the slowest increases were in Minneapolis and Oakland, California.
And I could say on Tampa, during the 2008-2009 collapse, Tampa had, a flood of hedge funds that came in and just bought up all of these properties in Tampa. And they were managing these properties as a property manager from their offices in Chicago. That always is going to go well, right? Hey, I have a leaky toilet. Yeah, call our Chicago office to help you with your leaky toilet. That's going to be good. And so they bought up tons of property in Tampa specifically. So what's the solution here? The solution is to build more homes. we have an affordable housing crisis in the United States. And, we're not moving quickly enough to do anything on this. I mean, the bottom line is we knew about this. We've known about this for years. There's been, and the amount of builders who are ramping up to try to, there's not enough. I mean, it's like a drop in the bucket. We need 20 million homes.
Yeah.
And we're nowhere near that. So expect to see prices and this continued lack of supply continuing to drive these prices up, unfortunately. But we'll keep our eye on it because I watch the real estate stuff very, very closely. So we'll report it here on the show.